Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. Trey, our backgrounds look a little bit different. Both of our lives are in flux and in cardboard boxes right now. So like I put in my little tag, if you're watching on YouTube, excuse our mess. We're doing our best right now. You're in the middle of moving. I'm in the middle of moving. I get married at the end of this week. A lot going on, man.
It's a busy time in life, man. I'm glad we picked, the kind of dog days of the off season to do all this stuff, because I don't know how we'd be able to juggle it with previews or actual games being played. So we picked the right time of year, at least, to get all this big life change taken care of.
That's right. I mean, gosh, it's been crazy trying to stay on track writing previews while doing all of this. We're going to be publishing those written previews as well as obviously creating videos for them. So stay tuned for that. You'll see all of the links when they go live over on our Twitter. Great time to subscribe to the channel at 3Tech Pod, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your college football content. We're right there. And we're growing like crazy right now, which has been a ton of fun. We're running a contest, $150 home field gift card giveaway. If you are entered in by ranking the teams in all four major conferences. So far, we've tweeted out the Big Ten and the SEC. We're looking for you to power rank them. That'll be the order that we preview those teams. So if you would like to get in on that contest, it's still going. It'll go all the way through the preseason at 3Tech Pod. It's pinned to our Twitter account, and you can find both polls linked under that tweet. Big 12 ACC will get tweeted out this week, so be on the look for that as well. Trey, in today's episode, we decided we've got questions about several big brands, big teams this season. With the expanded playoff, it was a great time to ask the question, what defines success for these certain teams? So we've got 8 teams or so that we're going to break down over the course of this week. You and I are tackling 4 of them today. You and Garrett will break down the other 4 later on in the week. But today, Trey, we're talking about Oregon, Ohio State, Clemson, and Florida State. All of these teams feel like front runners to make the college football playoff. But that term success, I feel like even in this category of thoroughbreds, may be a little bit different.
Yeah, because in the new 12-team college football playoff era, just making the playoff is not going to be enough for a lot of teams. That's not going to be the same as making a 4-team playoff. If you made a 4-team playoff, even if you lost your semifinal game, most programs, probably 99%, are doing cartwheels, right? There's maybe 3 or 4 in the entire country that are not satisfied with just making a 4-team playoff. Not going to be the case anymore. You're going to get there, and a lot of programs are going to have expectations to win 1 or 2 games at the very minimum. So excited to break all that down. Excited to see, how those tiers break down. Who truly should be expecting that, and who should be just happy to get there in this new environment.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's get into it, and let's start with the Oregon Ducks. They seem like one of the national championship or bust kind of teams. Obviously, Dan Lanning has that team trending in the right direction. They were halted by the Washington Huskies not once but twice a season ago as they fell in the Pac-12 championship game, kept them out of the college football playoff as well. But this year, a new quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, takes over. They've got a loaded offensive arsenal, and the defense has been getting better each and every year. Dan Lanning is a tough, physical kind of coach. The recruiting has really reflected that. And this Oregon team, I feel like I said, they're one of those 3, 4, 5 top picks to go and win a national championship this year. I believe you have the team totals pulled up right now. Are they still sitting at 10.5?
They are. They're at 10.5, and under 10.5 is a slight favorite. So it's minus 122 to go under, about even money to go over. So slight favorite for under 10.5 for the Ducks right now.
Yeah, that's fascinating that it's under. So let's look at the schedule to start off. Idaho, Boise State, Oregon State, their first 3 games. They're at Oregon State. Then they've got a chunk of games in a row. Most teams, as I've been writing previews, it's felt kind of like it's been somewhat like 4-4-4 with the 2 bye weeks kind of perfectly bisecting that schedule. That's not the case for Oregon. They've got at UCLA, Michigan State, Ohio State, at Purdue, Illinois, at Michigan, Maryland, at Wisconsin before they get a very weird bye week, November 23rd, and then they'll take on Washington to finish the season. They don't have Penn State on this schedule, which is good in the new Big Ten. Obviously, that's kind of the headline for Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. How will they do in this new conference? But still catching Ohio State, Michigan, and then as I think we'll talk about when we get to the previews, Maryland and Wisconsin in back-to-back weeks, that is no pillow fight. So as you look over that schedule, first of all, do you feel like that line is fair? And then secondly, what do you think a successful season for Oregon realistically should be?
I do think the line is fair because I think Dan Lanning and Oregon have earned that level of respect to this point. They are a 10-win program at this point in their development. They haven't quite made it to the playoff yet in the 4-team format. They haven't quite sealed the deal to be in the top of the elite, but they're a solid 10-win program. So betting, do they hit their 10-win plateau or eclipse that is, I think, a fair situation to bet. I also think they're in a situation this year, like, yes, the schedule's tricky. Yes, it's going to be really interesting to see how they navigate a completely new conference and venues they've never been to before. But I think overall, it's weird to say with a schedule that includes both Ohio State and Michigan, I think they did get a relatively favorable draw in the conference schedule. I think they're going to be favored in all but one of their games, and maybe even all of their games. At Michigan is the only one right now that I'm a little iffy on if they'll be favored. I think they'll be favored against Ohio State at home on October 12th. I really do. I think there's going to be that much respect for the home field of Autzen. Both of those teams are going to be coming in probably undefeated at that point, and it's going to be a huge seismic matchup. Probably the biggest game that's ever been played on campus in Eugene. So I think they'll be favored slightly. I think it'll be about a half-point favorite, maybe a pick 'em, but I don't think they'll be a dog in more than 1 or 2 games max this year. So if you just look at it from that standpoint, success is hitting this over first and foremost. Success is getting to Indianapolis and then seeing what happens from there. If you win that game in Indianapolis, you're a top 4 seed and you're expected to be a semifinalist in the Final Four, the way that the bracket sets up. So that's the base. Getting to Indianapolis is the baseline for me. I think anything else for Oregon this year is gravy, but they certainly have aspirations higher than just making it to that Big Ten championship game.
So on the flip side of that coin, if Oregon is to make the playoff, but let's say they make it via an at-large bid, and then depending on what they were to do after that, maybe they win a game, maybe they don't. Is it a successful season if they win the Big Ten and make the playoff versus it's not a successful season if they make the playoff as an at-large bid? Or where would you kind of draw that line of demarcation?
It'll probably depend on what the at-large bid looks like. If it means they lost that game in Indianapolis, maybe it's a rematch against Ohio State, right? They beat them in Eugene, but they come up just short in Indianapolis. I think Duck fans will take that and run with it. If they limp into the playoffs, play a road game, maybe at a 2nd or 3rd place SEC school in the first round and, get blitzed down south, obviously I think that's falling short of expectations. So it's really hard to say in June what making a 12-team playoff looks like as far as success. Because what if they're a 5 seed and they get the G5 champ going to Eugene, beat them by 50 points, and then lose the Rose Bowl against the 4 seed. That's maybe, the Big 12 champion or something like that. I think most Oregon fans would be a little disappointed with that result. I think that's a disappointing outcome. But if you win that Rose Bowl game or whatever bowl game it ends up being and play a tough game in the semifinals, you're probably really ecstatic and happy about the future. So the tools that they have, they are a national championship contender in this. Just to kind of give us a frame of reference here, Oregon is minus 250 to make the college football playoff right now. That means you have to bet $250 to win $100 if you're not familiar with what that means. So they're a heavy favorite to make it. So it's all going to depend on what it looks like after that. To win the national championship right now, they have the 4th best odds in the country at plus 850. So they're certainly expected to be at least a semifinalist, I would say, and making it to the semifinals should be the bar for what they seek to do in the in the playoff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, if you are shooting for the national championship and you miss and fall amongst the stars, like the semifinals, you would hope as an Oregon fan is kind of that floor, right? I think anything less than making the first expanded playoff is an abject failure, especially with the talent on that roster. You mentioned it, like the schedule is, I think, a little uncomfy the way it sets up with the bye weeks. They've got a couple of tricky road games. They go to Michigan, they go to Wisconsin. But other than that,
Oregon State too. That's going to be really interesting. How Corvallis treats them week 3.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a fully renovated, Reser Stadium,
and a mad fan base that feels like they got left behind.
Yeah, exactly. A very mad fan base. But I agree. I think we can call it a success if Oregon either wins the Big Ten championship and gets one of those locked down seeds, or and makes it to that second round. Beyond that, I think it depends solely on the matchup, right? Like here in June, you can't say, oh, well, yeah, if we, win the Big Ten championship but lose that first game, like, oh, forget the whole season. Like that doesn't feel right. There may be some fans out there saying that because, as we've said, they are one of those favorites to compete and maybe even win the national championship. But making the playoff, having a elevated seed, I think should be the goal for the Oregon Ducks here in year 1 of this expanded playoff.
Let me get slightly off topic here for just a second, but I'll tie it back to what we're talking about, I promise. But just to illustrate how interesting it's going to be to evaluate these seasons in general now, would you rather be the 5 seed or the 3 seed in the college football playoff in this 12-team format? I don't know if you've heard the national discussion that's going on about this, but there's some interesting debate going on. Because if you're the 5 seed, you're going to play the 12 seed in the first round. You're going to get a home game. It's going to be the G5 champion. And you're probably going to win that game by 30 points if you're an Oregon caliber team, right? We saw what Oregon did to Liberty last year in the Fiesta Bowl. Then you go play a neutral site game against a conference champion that in all likelihood isn't a true top 4 team, is not a true top 4 team. You're going to get the ACC or the Big 12 champion on a neutral site. If you're the 3 seed, you got your bye. Congratulations. Your reward is going to be to play your first game against your semifinal matchup eventually against the SEC or the Big 10 champion, the 1 or 2 seed. And just to get to that game, you're going to be playing a probably middle of the road Big 10 or SEC team that's going to be really excited to prove that they belong in this playoff. So it's going to be really interesting to see that there's a case to be made that the 5 seed is a really nice sweet spot. You didn't win your conference, but you basically have a free ride to the semifinals if you get that far.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. At the same time, I can easily say, it's college football, like crazy things happen every time we, tee it up to start that game. Plus, we saw how injuries and attrition really affected like Washington, right? Even to some extent Texas this last season. But Washington got worn down. And Michigan was the healthy team. They stayed in control. They were able to just steamroll their way to a national championship after handling, in a tight game, but handling Alabama. I think my gut says take the bye and run, and believe that, hey, we're the top, we're a 3 seed, we belong here, and we should be expected to win this game. You might not win that game, but Florida State found that out the hard way against Northern Alabama last year, right? Like, all
it's a bye week. It's a bye week. It's an easy win, but you lose your quarterback for the season, and all of a sudden you're out of the 14 playoff.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to Florida State. Don't worry, they're coming up here at the end of the show. Let's switch over to the Ohio State Buckeyes. Oregon and Ohio State are no doubt the 2 favorites coming out of the Big Ten this year as far as national championship contenders. The Ohio State Buckeyes players on that team have been quoted as saying it is national championship or bust. And it really feels like, for Ryan Day especially, it's time to put up or shut up, right? He's lost to Michigan the last 3 years. You look at those 2 teams on paper, I don't know that streak continues. And so if Ohio State is able to beat Michigan this year, years past, that's been the de facto, Big Ten East championship game, right? We get rid of divisions this year. Ohio State has some interesting games on this schedule. Not the most difficult schedule, I don't think, but as we get into it, I believe they're set at 10.5 as well for their team win total. Where are you leaning initially as you look at that line?
Looking at their win total, it is 10.5. It's a strong favorite to bet the over. It's -150 to take the over, +120 to say that they'll lose 2 games or more.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm at. If they lose more than 2 regular season games, that is an abject failure. Yes, they will more than 1 regular season game. I think that's an abject failure because that means they split with Oregon and Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's a loss to Michigan, whole buddy, he might get left at. They might. Is that at home this year? It is at home. So they might drive him to a tarmac to leave him on the tarmac this year. So I don't know. It's interesting to see how the schedule plays out because they really only have the 2 tricky road games at Oregon and at Penn State. You've been very vocal about not trusting Penn State this year to win a big one, and you feel like their window's closed. So I guess that means that in your mind that win at Oregon, win against Michigan, and you're golden. And you might even have room for a slip up and still win the Big Ten. But yeah, winning the Big Ten is the bar. And beyond that, winning the national championship is the bar. If it doesn't happen this year for Ryan Day, I'm concerned that it never will because he has the most talented roster he's ever had. He doesn't have Jim Harbaugh looming over his shoulder. He has a reloading Michigan. He has an Oregon that's going to be, new to the conference and figuring things out in the Big Ten and traveling way more miles over the course of the year than he is. And you have a Penn State that's trying to get on their feet and figure out their offense. So they're by far and away the preseason class of the Big Ten. They need to prove it on the field this year for me to consider it successful.
I think Ohio State has one of the toughest 3-game stretches in conference of anybody in the country. They've got at Oregon. They do have a bye week, October 19th, but then they host Nebraska and then travel to Beaver Stadium to take on Penn State. The bye week between Oregon and Nebraska is huge because I think that Oregon game, whether you win or lose, like that's a season-defining game. I think you want that bye week to kind of catch your breath, reassess, and then potentially take on an undefeated Nebraska team at home that next week before you go to Penn State. Right now, I might be a little bit more afraid of Nebraska than I am Penn State. We just don't know enough about that Nittany Lion offense right now. But after that, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, and Michigan are who's left on that schedule. And that Michigan team, Trey, there's a lot of projections that even have Michigan ending up as low as 7-5, just with the roster turnover. There's no clear-cut QB1. as of right now heading into fall camp. So I don't know. I agree. I feel like the Oregon game aside, I think you get one loss on this schedule. Take care of the rest of your business, probably rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. And then at that point, if you're not winning out with the likes of Will Howard at quarterback, Quinshon Judkins, and Travion Henderson running the football, what they've got on that defense coming back with the pass rush experience, Caleb Downs in the secondary, like there is no excuse for Ohio State this year. And to me, to not go at least 11-1 and quite honestly end up in the national championship game, I think Ohio State fans are going to riot.
I'm right there with you. And if you're an Ohio State fan and you disagree and you think we have the pulse of the fan base completely wrong, please let us know, because from the outside looking in, it sure does seem like you guys are frustrated and itching for a championship for the first time since that first 14 playoff. So it's been a long time. That's a long drought for Ohio State. Most programs would kill for a 10-year drought, but 10 years is torture for Ohio State fans.
That's true. Let me ask you this as we close Ohio State. Who else in the country do you think could do a better job than what Ryan Day has done, right? I mean, he's lost, 3 conference games in his tenure, and all 3 of them are to Michigan. Isn't that right?
I think he slipped up again.
At Penn
He's
State,
been
maybe?
upset. He's been upset a couple one time. Did he lose to Purdue, or was that still
Maybe, yeah, that might have been the Jeff Brom Spoilermakers.
I think that was the Ryan Day era, but I might be mixing my years up there. But yeah, I mean, even if that's the case, the point still stands that he's just been a couple of, and let's be honest, this past year, it was a couple of missed plays away from beating Michigan, right? Like they are driving to win that game in the Big House, and then you lose the storybook ending for Harbaugh. Ohio State probably wins the national championship if they get in this year, because I think they take the same route that Michigan did. So yeah, it's championship or bust. And I don't know, to answer your question, I don't know who would have done a better job than Ryan Day at this point. But when Ohio State fans got spoiled with Urban Meyer beating Michigan and just becoming a given that they were going to beat Michigan, and that goes all the way back to Jim Tressel as well.
Yeah.
You get spoiled with that. And I think you start to see, well, man, if Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer could do it, this guy just isn't up to that standard. And we have a high standard. And they have earned a high standard at Ohio State. So I'm not trying to say that their expectations are too high, because I think they have rightfully high standards. But with the rosters and with the way that Michigan was completely engineered to beat Ryan Day's Ohio State team, I don't know. Like Nick Saban obviously probably would have figured it out. Kirby Smart might have figured it out. But if you're talking about attainable alternatives, I don't think there's anybody that would have done better than Ryan Day.
Ohio State head coach Nick Saban.
If he loses to Michigan this year, Ohio State will make Saban say no. They will make Saban say no.
They might put out an Indeed ad, just get everybody applying for the job. See what fish bite. I agree. I think Ohio State has the highest expectation on them of any team this year, and that includes Texas, that includes Alabama. That I think it's more maybe nervous expectation that I feel like some of their fans are maybe looking for a reason to not like Kalen DeBoer. I mean, it's just he's set up for failure, right, at Alabama. Like, you're following the greatest of all time. That's a tough fiddle to play. But I think Ohio State, without a doubt, has the highest pressure and level of expectations on them of any team in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And Garrett and I talked last week about how that level of pressure and expectation probably ran Kyle McCord out of town. And I don't think it's probably. Yeah. I think it definitely ran Kyle McCord out of town, and how much he's just going to have fun playing college football at Syracuse this year without the weight of those lofty expectations. But again, rightful lofty expectations. They deserve it as a program. They have earned the right to have those lofty expectations.
All right, well, let's transition over to the ACC, at least while those teams are still in this conference. And let's start with the Clemson Tigers. What is the level of expectation in Death Valley? What would you say defines success for a Clemson team that is kind of lost their footing over the last couple of seasons?
I mean, it starts with getting back to that baseline of 10 wins, right? And they don't have the luxury of playing in a conference where 10 wins will automatically get you in. I think if they're in the SEC or the Big 10 and they get to 10 wins, 99% of the time, you're going to be locked and loaded in a 12-team playoff format. So getting to 10 wins would be awesome. That would probably get them into the ACC championship game in Charlotte. And of course, now they win that game, they're automatically in, and they're a top 4 seed in the playoff all of a sudden. So get to 10 wins. That's a solid baseline, and I think a fair expectation for the talent level of Clemson. And if Dabo can't do that in the current iteration of the ACC, especially with this schedule that he has right now, I don't know. It might be time to start looking around and thinking if Dabo is the same that he was 5 or 6 years ago, if college football has changed so much that it's kind of passed him by. Because their schedule, Mitch, it's not difficult. I know they start with Georgia, and then they have NC State at home. I think, man, NC State is borderline darling team for me right now. I haven't locked them in as a darling, but
careful. Been there.
Fan. I know. We've been down this road before. I think both of us have had them before, but it just seems like if it doesn't happen this year, it's never going to happen for the Wolfpack. They have them week 3, but they get them at home. Their only road games that I'm worried about are at Florida State and at Virginia Tech. And I think they're going to be a slight underdog at Florida State. I think they're going to be favored by about a touchdown, probably at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's going to be plucky, but if Clemson is truly playoff caliber, they should handle this iteration of Virginia Tech in my mind, even in Blacksburg. So the schedule other than that is really it's shaping up to be really easy, especially in the ACC. They get Stanford, Wake Forest, I think is going to be god-awful. Virginia is going to be god-awful. Louisville is going to be plucky, but new quarterback and a lot of turnover on that team. Then they have a Pitt team on the road that I think is also going to be very difficult. So, or not very difficult. So, I don't know. Like, if they don't get to 10 wins on that schedule, we got to start asking some real questions about Dabo Swinney's future at Clemson.
Couple things. First of all, with NC State, beware the seductive tones of Grayson McCall and the Wolfpack. I've
already gone on the record, man, multiple times. Like, I'm way past not ignoring the seductive tones. I'm in on Grayson McCall as a Wolfpack.
They should be a ton of fun this year. Secondly, I know you were looking at conference opponents, but you skipped right over App State in week 2.
That's true. Did
we not learn that lesson in person a couple of years ago that you can't just skip over the Mountaineers?
The career arcs of Jimbo Fisher and Dabo Swinney are shockingly similar, are they not? Like, other than switching schools, like the only thing missing between those two career arcs right now, obviously Dabo won more than one title, and Dabo didn't switch schools. But
are you saying Dabo is the Southern Baptist Jimbo Fisher?
I'm not saying he's not. I'm not saying he's not, Mitch, because the program trajectory is just a little scary. And I think if you put Jimbo Fisher in the ACC, the records probably look pretty similar to what – obviously Clemson has not bottomed out like Jimbo Fisher did. But, I mean, people are talking. People are talking about what the future looks like. And if he doesn't doesn't get 10 on the schedule, because you're right, App State's going to be plucky, but they're at home. And if you are Clemson, what Dabo Swinney has turned Clemson into, you should beat Appalachian State by multiple scores. I know they're plucky. I know they're fun, but Dabo's Clemson, if he has not fallen off, should beat Appalachian State by multiple scores at home.
Right. App State shouldn't be scoring more than 10 against that Clemson defense at home, right? Like, that's what they've done, is they've just smothered teams in Death Valley. The last thing that I'll say is actually, let me just correct a little bit of Virginia slander. Tony Muskett and the boys, I was doing some reading the other day. They might not be atrocious. I can't speak for that defense at all. I don't know that anybody can speak for the defense, but the offense might be kind of fun to watch. So, Cavs Nation, like, let's ride. Let's see what you got. As far as threatening Clemson, though, point well taken. They certainly shouldn't do that. Yeah,
and
I'm
if
not.
those teams do threaten Clemson, the narrative just writes itself about Dabo, because that's what's been happening the last 2 or 3 years, ever since Trevor Lawrence walked out the door.
Yeah.
They have not been dominating the teams that Clemson is supposed to dominate.
Yeah.
And if they continue to do that this year, the questions are rightfully valid.
Man, and if South Carolina makes it 2 trips in a row, beating Clemson in Death, like Lenoris Sellers, if Lenoris Sellers walks into Death Valley and comes out with a victory, Dabo's in all kinds of hot water. I think when I look at this schedule, and I haven't gotten to the ACC written preview yet, so I don't have a projection, like an official take on the over-under. I think 10 wins is the absolute floor before you start rolling your eyes and going, oh my gosh, they did it again. Like Dabo, if you're not going to mine the transfer portal, if you are going to stand on this soapbox and make that your brand, then you have to win double-digit games every single season.
Right.
Otherwise, you're out of excuses. Like you probably should not be coaching at a program like Clemson if you are going to look at the top way to get talent and to create a winner overnight, which is the transfer portal. And if you're going to say, nope, we don't do that, and it costs you games, I honestly think you could fire Dabo, with some sort of cause for that. I think it would be mismanagement.
Absolutely. It'd be gross mismanagement, because when you look around the teams that have passed them up in the ACC, Florida State is built through the portal. Miami is projected to pass them this year. I know they didn't the last couple of years, but they're projected to maybe pass them this year, built through the portal. All around the country, these teams that are on supposedly Clemson's peers are reloading through the portal. Alabama's doing it. If Nick Saban's doing it, you better be doing it to keep up. And I know that he is obviously gone, but it's gross mismanagement if you don't back it up by winning at least 10 games. I think that's completely accurate what you just said. Because, they're probably going to lose to Georgia week 1. I think that's fair to say. And you'll give them one loss throughout that conference schedule at Florida State. But if you're not winning the rest of those games on your schedule and competitive with Florida State at the very least, then you're obviously letting your program get lapped by the rest of the league. And that's just unacceptable.
Totally agree with you on that. I'm fascinated. Clemson is one of the most fascinating stories, for better or for worse, each year right now. I cannot wait to see how their 2024 goes. Let's end the episode with Florida State. Man, justice for Mike Norvell and the troops down there in Tallahassee. They were absolutely shellacked by the playoff committee. I will continue to bang that drum, but another chance here to make the playoff in 2024. It's a very interesting start to the season. They played Georgia Tech on the road in Dublin, Ireland, before Boston College. Then they've got Memphis on the schedule as well, which is one of the favorites to make the playoff as that G5 conference champion. SMU, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame, all on the schedule before Florida. The path to the playoff certainly seems wide open, because I don't know that we expect one team to dominate the ACC this year. I think in a lot of minds, Florida State and Clemson, that game may determine one of those spots in Charlotte for the conference championship, if not just a rematch entirely. But the over-under for them is 1 back. Is that correct? Is it 9.5?
9.5. Clemson is actually at 9.5 right now as well. So
okay.
But they are dead even both ways, over and under, minus 110.
See, I feel like I'm more confident, even though Florida State has the objectively more difficult schedule. I feel like I'm more confident in Florida State replacing the quarterback, replacing all of that production, than I am Clemson just building a program the traditional way. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe
does Florida State have the more difficult schedule in your mind?
I think so.
There's no Memphis. Georgia. There's no, road trip to a team the caliber of Florida State on Florida State's schedule. Like Clemson has to go to Florida State. I know they have at Miami, at Notre Dame, at SMU. That's a tricky 3-pack, but
I think it's I don't think it's like So Georgia's no doubt the most difficult game on either schedule, right? That's, we're already chalking that up as a loss. For Clemson, I just look at potential landmines. I think there are more potential landmines on the Noles schedule than I think there are on Clemson. Like, listen, weird things happen in the kickoff game over in Dublin, right? That should be a comfortable win for Florida State. It really should. I think they're going to be able to get to Haynes King, very turnover-prone quarterback for all of his, flash and sizzle and leading them to six wins and a bowl victory last year as well. But they're just more landmines on this schedule. Memphis is going to be really good. SMU, I'm seeing projections that SMU goes 10-2, 11-1. There are a lot of folks very high on the ponies this year. We've got the Clemson game, Miami, North Carolina at Notre Dame, and then Florida's at home. But we saw like a depleted Florida roster last year nearly pulled off that upset against the Noles. That may be a beleaguered and beaten down Florida team that's competing for a fourth win on their schedule. I don't know, but I just tend to think the overall chance that Florida State drops 2, maybe 3 games is higher than I do Clemson.
I think that's fair. Success for the Noles this year to me is really simple. Do you make it to the college football playoff or do you not? And I think it's going to come down to, did DJU's year away from the ACC out at Oregon State, did he remove himself from enough pressure to be able to come back to a pressure-packed environment and be able to succeed? Because, to be honest, his numbers weren't that different at Oregon State. He wasn't asked to do as much at Oregon State, so that's why he was more successful, and that's why on the field they won. They won more games and were more competitive than and the offense looked more cohesive than it did when he was at Clemson. But he's going from very little pressure. I know everybody in Corvallis wants to win, but not at the level that they want to win in Tallahassee, especially after the taste that they got last year and being just on the doorstep. So that's what it's going to come down to me. Did you make a right evaluation in the portal? Because there were other portal quarterbacks out there as well.
There were.
That you could have gotten Riley Leonard from Duke. You could have really pushed for him maybe. And obviously I don't know if he was even interested in Florida State, but Riley Leonard at Duke, you could have gone and gotten, a plethora of guys, but you hitched your wagon to DJU this year. And that's what it's going to come down to. If he's successful, Florida State will be successful, and they will sneak into the college football playoff, either as the ACC champ or in one of the last at larges, competing with maybe a second Big 12 team. So that's success for me. Did you get in or did you not? And it doesn't really matter how it looks. It's not a beauty contest at this point. Just, did you get in? And if you did, it's successful. If you didn't, try again next year in a depleted ACC.
I think that's very fair. I feel like that's a very realistic expectation for Florida State. And I know, listen, the adversity that you went through last year, like, that has to be one of the most bitter tastes that you could possibly have left in your mouth after the way that Jordan Travis goes down and the committee just shafts you, right? I don't think that the pain from last year should be lumped on this team as undue expectation, right? You get to the ACC championship game, awesome. You've got a chance to go lock down a playoff spot and maybe, if not, sneak in as one of those final at-large bids. But Florida State, no doubt, is a team on the rise. I think overall, in the trajectory of college football, progress isn't linear. We know this. Honestly, if they struggle a little bit this year, I sold my Noles coin last year at record profits. Give me a buying opportunity, man. Give me a chance. If they lose a game that they shouldn't, and folks are discounting Noles coin, I will happily buy back in for my boy Mike Norvell.
Yeah, and I think he's earned that benefit of the doubt with the way that he has really just resurrected that program and put them in this position where a playoff berth is successful, because they were down bad when he was there. They were down bad his first year there. And the way that he was given time and just resurrected that program is really admirable. But I'm questioning hitching his wagon to DJU. I really am. I'm interested to see how that plays out. And I know that he has a whole team around him, and there's a lot of talent on defense. There's a lot of receiver talent. but they lost a lot of guys last year that really were the backbone of resurrecting that program. And it feels like if they would have made the playoff last year, we'd be talking about, okay, that was the high point, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to take a step back this year, but they're going to rebuild and try to build back to that height that they got last year. Feels like we almost are giving them less chance of taking a step back because they were left out of the playoff last year. Feels like an unfinished arc, and I think that's why we're maybe a little bit higher on Florida State than we maybe should be. But to be fair, I do think that success is making the playoff for a program of that caliber, and hitching your wagon to DJU is a really interesting way to make that happen. I'm fascinated. Like, I'm not saying that he's not going to be successful. I'm not saying he's going to be a Heisman candidate. I have no idea, and that's what's so fascinating to me.
It's a great storyline. It's one of the best storylines in college football.
How much of a redemption arc would that be if he comes back to the conference that he just could not cut it in and tears it up? That would be fantastic.
That would be tremendous to watch. And I think there's enough supporting cast specifically on offense where Florida State could make that happen. But we'll see. We'll get into all the team previews in depth coming up in just a couple of weeks. Again, follow us at 3Tech Pod. If you are a fan of college football, we're going to have written previews. We're going to have video previews coming out. We have the $150 home field gift card giveaway as well. All you have to do is follow those Jot Form links on our Twitter account, do the power rankings, and you are entered in for that gift card each power ranking that you do. You'll be able to subscribe to our new Substack. That's coming out very soon as well. We'd love to have you continue to join the Jimmies and the Joes. For Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him.